What up, people? If you didn't know, I'm a huge fan of turn-based RPGs. The seed was planted as a kid with my love for Pokemon, and it slowly grew over the years. And thankfully, there's an endless amount of quality turn-based RPGs and jrpgs to choose from. And because of that, I took it upon myself to name 10 turn-based RPGs that I feel everyone should play. But before I start, if you're new to the channel, I make videos on single-player games with a heavy focus on RPGs. If that's something that interests you and you're never enjoying this video, consider subscribing or just hitting the like button to help with the algorithm. And with the intro out of the way, let's get started on the list. The first game I want to talk about is Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes. This game was on my radar ever since I backed the Kickstarter 4 years ago. The game was made by Rabbit and Bear Studios and was made as a spiritual successor to the beloved Suikoden series. During combat, up to 6 units can be on your side of the battlefield at once, 3 in the front row and 3 in the back. Every character has a range of either short, medium, and long, which will determine where and how far the attacks can reach. Units with a short reach have to be up front to do damage, and the rear should probably be used for long range attackers, healers, and units who may not have the best physical defense as they're harder to hit back there. Magic is used by equipping runes to your units in the available rune slots. As the unit's level increases, more slots will become available over time, and depending on the rune, you'll have a different set of abilities or spells. Unfortunately, only certain runes can be used by certain units, which is kind of annoying at first, but I got over it pretty quickly. So far in my playthrough, I'm really enjoying the characters I've met and recruited onto my team. They all had different personalities, and it makes it fun to try and find all 100 of them. Around the time the game released, there were a lot of performance issues, specifically with the Nintendo Switch. I'm almost positive all of that has been patched away, but just do a double check to make sure the game runs well on your platform of choice. But anyway, if you're a fan of the old Suikoden games or just pixel graphic games in general, Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes is 100% a must-buy. Next on the list we have Coromon. This game is your standard turn-based monster taming game inspired by the old 2D Pokemon from the Game Boy days. Coromon, similar to the games like Tim and Nexomon, use stamina or SP to use moves as opposed to Pokemon, which have varied number of uses. The stronger a move, the more stamina it costs, and therefore will make your SP go down faster. If you run out of SP, you can skip a turn and rest, which will bring back half of your SP. You can also rest at any time to prevent yourself from running out. This stamina system leads to battles being much more challenging, yet never feeling daunting or difficult. But unlike Pokemon, there are no gym leaders in this game. Instead, you'll have 6 Titan battles, which are pretty much just like boss battles that are tied to the main story. It can be very difficult if not prepared. Which, speaking of story, I believe last year there was a huge update across platforms for the game where they added a lot more content, including a new reworked story, which makes this a perfect time to jump back in. While playing the game, one of the things that stood out to me personally was how good the designs for a lot of the Coromon are. I can't speak for others, but good or bad monster designs can really make or break a monster taming game for me. Obviously, gameplay is probably what's most important the most, but if I don't like how any of the monsters I'm catching look, I'm probably going to drop the game altogether. Thankfully, the designs of the creatures you'll be collecting is easily one of the best parts of the game. As someone who grew up a huge Pokemon fan, having a modern take on this old school Game Boy era is something I really appreciate. At number 8, we're going more tactical with Marvel's Midnight Suns. If you're a fan of Marvel or superheroes in general, you'll be happy to know that the game features comic book characters from multiple Marvel comic properties such as Midnight Suns, Avengers, X-Men, and the Runaways. When it comes to gameplay, the combat system is similar to that of XCOM, but mixes in some deck building and management. Each hero has their own set of cards with their own strengths and weaknesses, and it's really fun figuring out what works well with the Hunter, who is the character you'll create and play as. Outside of the main missions, there will also be side missions to do to level up your character, and when you're not doing that, you'll be spending most of your time at the Abbey. The Abbey is the main base of operation and is where you acquire new cards and also upgrade pre-existing ones as well. You'll also be able to spend time with specific heroes, and by doing that, the specific hero will have a power boost the next time you take them on a mission. Now, I will say that this game's humor and dialogue is very similar to that of the movies with the incessant talking and also quips. If you're like me and don't mind, then you're golden, but I know there's a lot of exhaustion with the way Marvel writes jokes, so I felt the need to mention it. I really had a blast with the time I spent with the game. Usually I'm not a huge fan of these XCOM, Gears Tactics style turn-based games, but I think the card aspect of it really sold me personally. So if you don't mind a little deck building mixed in with your strategy games, then Marvel's Midnight Suns will be a lot of fun. Let's stick with tactics for number 7 and talk about triangle strategy. As someone who loves the Fire Emblem franchise and this new wave of HD 2D RPGs we've been getting, this game was pretty much made for me. Just like Fire Emblem, you'll be moving your characters or units across the grid-based field to battle the enemy units. Each character has unique abilities and a set movement range per turn, as well as a number of special attacks and skills that consume a limited but rechargeable pool of tactical points per character. While playing through the main story, leveling up characters by using them in battle will increase their attributes and unlock new special attacks and skills, and players can also upgrade individual attributes in their character's class to make them more effective in combat. Every chapter or so will introduce a new character to your squad, and there'll also be little side events that introduce characters as well. When it comes to story, the game features a storyline with branching paths with 4 possible unique endings. At various points, the player and their party arrives at a major decision by consulting the scales of conviction, in which they vote for a specific outcome. And while we're on the topic of story, it seems that it is a deciding factor in whether you'll like this game or not. The story is great, but a lot of people have complained that the game has a lot of cutscenes and they would go long stints without any gameplay at all. Now, with me being a huge story person, I don't mind this at all, but if you're someone where story is secondary and you don't care about it at all, that's something to think about. But be that as it may, Triangle Strategy is an amazing strategy RPG with a beautiful art style that every turn-based fan should add to their collection. Just outside the top 5, let's keep it going with pixel graphic games with Chain Echoes. Unlike other RPGs new and old that feature random encounters, in Chain Echoes, enemies are visible on the map and trigger encounters on the same screen, similar to Chrono Trigger. During fights, each character in the player's party has a standard attack, several special abilities, items, and a defensive stance. Speaking of combat, party members use attacks and abilities that raise the overdrive meter, which reaches an optimal green zone where abilities are more effective. However, the overdrive meter can overheat and the party must discharge some of the excess by using specific abilities such as defenses and ultra moves. I'm not too sure if it's in other games, but the overdrive meter is probably one of the best mechanics I've ever experienced in a game, let alone an RPG. It adds an extra level of thinking to your moves because you want to constantly stay in the green zone, and because of that, you have to strategize your moves. It's like having an extra battle during battle, which really helps keep the game from feeling repetitive, at least for me. This game was developed by only one guy and was inspired from games like Xenogears, Secret of Mana, Suikoden, and Final Fantasy. Chain Echoes was made by and for fans of RPGs, and even though it's at number 6 on this list, this is definitely a must-buy for turn-based fans. Kicking off the top 5, we have the first of a couple Atlas games on this list, Persona 3 Reload. This RPG was released in February and is a remake of Persona 3, which was released in 2006, and also the 4th main installment of the Persona series. Other than the modern graphics, there were a lot of added features to this remake in regards to social links and also combat. Similar to Shin Megami Tensei, Persona games involve you fighting and or recruiting personas doing turn-based combat. However, unlike SMT games, Persona games are a lot more forgiving in the difficulty department. One of the new additions when it comes to combat is what's known as Shift, which is very similar to Baton Pass from Persona 5, which involves the ability to switch between characters after hitting an enemy's weak point. Another cool mechanic is called jrpg, which is a super move that can be utilized after filling up a player's gauge through Persona abilities and basic melee attacks. The speed of gauges filling up varies among characters based on different conditions being met, such as critical hits or using support skills. Also, not only can the move not be dodged, but it also ignores the resistances of the personas, so make sure you use it when you need to turn the tide in a big fight. I'm a huge fan of Persona 5, and while not on that level overall, at least for me, Persona 3 Reload clicked with me just like P5 did. The combat is really good, most of the side stories and people around town are compelling, and so far the overall story might even be better than that of Persona 5. If you've never played a Persona game before and you're trying to dip your toe into the franchise, Persona 3 Reload is the perfect game for you. Sticking with Atlas, at number 4 we have Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance. This turn-based RPG was released on June 13th and is the new definitive version of SMT5 that was released in 2021. If you're not familiar with this Atlas franchise, I've said in many videos already that SMT is pretty much Pokemon with some added Dark Souls difficulty on the side. While there are multiple difficulty settings if you want an easier time or enjoying the story, just know that hard mode really means hard mode. Outside of updated graphics coming from being multi-platform, some of the many other additions to Vengeance include 40 new demons, a boss rush challenge mode, previous DLC, a new story route, and many quality of life improvements. However, as far as core gameplay, everything's pretty much the same. You recruit demons to fight alongside you and try to exploit weaknesses to make battles go a lot smoother. Just like Persona, fusing demons to get stronger demons is essential, especially if playing on higher difficulties. One of the coolest game mechanics in my opinion are the upgraded Makasui skills. These new skills can only be used by multiple demons, and they have to be specific demons in order to get certain moves. There's also a new mechanic called innate skills, which every demon will have. It'll activate automatically, and some of the skills pair well with Makasui's moves. With all the new and old mechanics being mixed in together, along with all the different demons you can obtain, there's a very layered level of strategy that goes with this game if you're one of those obsessive RPG types like myself. The game has seen stellar reviews across all platforms, with it being praised for its combat, updated graphics and frame rate, party customization, and character development in regards to the new story route. If you already played and beat the original, it's a little difficult to recommend this, especially at full price. But if you haven't played it, didn't finish it, or you're looking for a turn-based game that prides itself on difficulty, Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance has got you covered. If we're talking turn-based, then I have to bring up one of my favorite franchises, so at number 3 we have Fire Emblem Three Houses. This strategy RPG is the first mainline entry in the Fire Emblem series on the Nintendo Switch and the 16th mainline entry overall. If you've never played a Fire Emblem game before, it takes the standard gameplay formula of units fighting their way across a grid-based battlefield, but adds much more stakes to it. One of the ways it does that is by adding what's known as permadeath, which is a mechanic where if one of your units loses all their health, they're considered dead and you can't use them anymore in future chapters. Now, you can always turn this feature off in newer Fire Emblem games, but most fans of the series will advise against that because they feel permadeath makes every decision during battle that much more crucial. Fire Emblem's other unique mechanic is what's known as supports. Supports are bonds that lead to conversational skits between characters in the game. These conversations only happen if the bond and or the relationship between these two characters grow, whether it's through combat by them fighting alongside each other, or through various events during your time in the monastery such as sharing a meal, returning items, giving gifts, etc. In my opinion, the support conversations do a great job of fleshing out these characters, or at the very least just making them feel like real people and not just silent units in the game. One of the strongest parts of Three Houses is its narrative. After a specific chapter and story event happens, each house has their own separate story path to follow, and while some are definitely better than others, I feel most will be happy with the path they choose. Well, maybe except one of them. I can honestly say that Fire Emblem Three Houses is not only one of my favorite strategy RPGs, but one of the best RPGs I've ever had the privilege of playing. While there are probably more simpler games out there to get into strategy RPGs, I can't think of many that would be as fun and fulfilling as Fire Emblem Three Houses. Just missing out on the top spot, we have Baldur's Gate 3. Being a huge fan of Divinity Original Sin 2, I was already pretty familiar with the combat style, so I was already kind of sold on this game. Some people debate about whether the combat in Divinity Original Sin 2 is better than Baldur's Gate 3, and while there are a few advantages to Divinity, I much prefer the combat in Baldur's Gate. While it took some getting used to figure out strategic advantages during fights, after I started to focus on that, the battles became much more fun. Also, you get 12 classes to choose from, and whether you choose to have companions or not, picking a class that fits your playstyle or group synergy I found was very important. For example, I initially started out as a rogue because I think assassins are cool, but I noticed that he wasn't doing a lot of damage compared to my other companions, and my character specifically was dying a lot. So I switched to the ranger class, which focuses much more on long range combat, which I'm much more comfortable with, and now he's arguably my strongest character. And that's just 2 of the 12 classes I could choose from, so no matter if you like long range combat, short range, melee, or magic, there's definitely a class for you, and when you get into subclasses, then you can get a character tailored made just for what you want and need. Now let's move on to what makes this game one of my favorite recent RPGs, the side quests. I'm a big fan of well done side missions, and Baldur's Gate 3 is up there with some of the best I've seen in the game in a long time, maybe since Witcher 3. I'm currently about midway through Act 3, and there really hasn't been a mission I could think of that was just simply a fetch quest or a mission that felt tacked on just to boost playtime hours. They all feel well thought out, and the way some of your decisions in those side quests weave into the main story is incredible. Speaking of choices, I love how your choices and decisions affect so much in the game, whether it's what missions you have access to, places you're allowed to go, or if an NPC or companion will join or betray you. And while we're talking about companions, there were so many times where you had to make a choice and there was no way all 3 of your companions were going to like the decision. And I love when games do that. There's no easy choice or right choice, it's just your choice. Whether it's story, combat, or exploration, this game is the definition of freedom. There's so many different options and solutions to issues that it'd be hard to have the exact same outcome to a mission as someone else. There are very few games out there that I would say were made specifically for me, but Baldur's Gate 3 is definitely on that list. And finally, at number 1, we have the most recent game on this list, Metaphor ReFantazio. At the moment, I'm 55 hours into the game, so I have a lot I want to say about the game, but I'll keep it fairly short. Right out the gate, what stood out the most for me with this game is the mature tone. If you play Shin Megami Tensei, you'll probably be used to the dark topics covered, but if you're coming from, say, Persona, then you might be a little surprised at the themes this game tackles. Murder, prejudice, and classism are all topics covered throughout the game, and it's extremely refreshing to say the least. Outside of turn-based combat, there's also some real-time action as well. Before an enemy sees you, you can start attacking using the melee button in order to weaken and possibly stun the opponent. While attacking, if at any point you want to start the actual fight, you can hit the squad button and the turn-based combat will begin. Something I really like about this hybrid combat is that if you are much stronger than enemies, you can kill them with 1 or 2 melee attacks without having to switch to turn-based. This makes grinding and going through dungeons a lot less dreadful, and it's a very useful mechanic that more RPGs need to utilize. The most unique mechanic in this game is what's known as archetypes, which is your party members becoming spiritual embodiments of heroes and kings. Different archetypes specialize in different things such as magic, healing, melee attacks, and even long range attacks. Once one of your party members studies an archetype, any of the other party members can unlock it as well, so feel free to play around with different combinations. Seeing as how different enemies and dungeons are going to have different weaknesses to exploit, it's going to be important that you pick different archetypes that cover up your other allies' weaknesses for better synergy. As your party members level up during fights, their current archetype will level up as well, which will lead to them learning new and much stronger abilities. You can also inherit skills from other archetypes and add it to your current one, but that and also studying archetypes are going to cost mag, which is a second type of currency this game uses. If it wasn't for Final Fantasy Rebirth, Metaphor ReFantazio would easily be my game of the year, because everything from the amazing combat all the way down to the gorgeous art style is top notch. If you're still watching this video, that means you're a fan of turn-based RPGs, so do yourself a favor and pick up the best one that's come out in 2024. That's all I got for you guys today. What turn-based RPG are you currently playing? What's your favorite of all time? Let me know in the comments. If you want to see more RPG content from me, click one of the links on the screen. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to keep up with the channel. Later.